Joseph speaking. I think we're ready to begin. I would like to welcome everyone tonight. We have 6 attendees already sitting in our room. Thank you all for being here. We are discussing teaching deaf youth the value of retirement planning. And we've got Mike Kane with us here tonight for this conversation that we're about to dive right into soon. Let me just look at the chat box, see if there's any requests or comments. Okay, looks like we're looking good. Thank you again tonight. This is Joseph. We are using a Zoom webinar program for tonight's webinar. I just want to remind everyone to have the most updated version of Zoom, and the best experience to be had is by clicking on full screen size. And when you are full screen size, there is a line down the middle of your screen that you can use to change sides on the video screen versus the shared slides that are there. So if you have any issues, please reach out in the chat bar and we'll be more than happy to assist. We also would like to take a minute now to introduce ourselves. We have CSD Learn Support Team. I'm Joseph Santini. I'm tonight's host. I'm Director of Instruction at the Laurent Clerc National Deaf Education Center. And we're thrilled to have our speaker tonight, Michael Kane, our guest panelist. Mike, do you mind just talking about yourself a bit?
Sure thing. My name is Mike Kane, and I'm an instructor at RIT NTID since 2006, and I teach accounting and spreadsheets. Specifically for students who are receiving their ASC level and their degree. So thank you for having me here tonight.
So let me ask you, what age level is that at? Or what grade level, actually?
College level, but I have mostly freshmen and sophomores. Occasionally I'll have juniors and seniors for advanced accounting courses.
Wow. As a person who's employed at a deaf institution, I am really interested in what the gaps are out there with financial education and knowledge. So thank you for being here tonight.
Sure thing.
I want to also take a minute to thank our CSD Learns team. We have Brian Milburn, we've got Jazzy Jones, Keith Delk, and Megan Kluza supporting wonderful support, making tonight's webinar possible. Thanks to the four. So we'll begin our discussion and our webinar tonight. Got one more thanks to give. We'd like to thank 2 organizations who have been very supportive of our mission. Which is CSD Learns and Hands-On Banking, which is a free online course offered to those who use American Sign Language. So we'd like to thank both CSD and Wells Fargo Hands-On Banking for making tonight possible. Thank you both organizations. The Financial Education Webinar Series has been established to address the needs seen across the country. There is a big gap of financial literacy existing in deaf and hard of hearing communities. And we know that deaf and hard of hearing folks are also underemployed, at least 70% either under or unemployed throughout the country. And so we would like to improve the economic picture for deaf and hard of hearing people. So we'd like to support parents, educators, social workers, any of those who are involved with deaf youth in their lives to be able to provide them that support. We'd also like to create a space online where we can come together and learn from each other's experience and have that discussion about this subject. And so tonight, specifically, our goals are to discuss any challenges that high school teachers and parents face teaching financial literacy to their youth. And it can be challenging for parents of high school students to teach financial literacy. So what we've done is We have brought the knowledge of experts within the deaf community, and we've given them an opportunity here to go ahead and have parents and participants ask their burning questions and get those answers. And we're also going to share financial education, resources, materials, and tools. So if we're all ready, we shall.
I'm ready.
Okay. I'd like to start discussing with why would we want to teach deaf kids about retirement? Mike, we've got 3 bullet points on the PowerPoint. Would you like to talk about those?
Yes, and this is true, that the earlier one learns about retirement, the better. You can learn from role models such as your family, people in your neighborhood or in your school.
Right, the second bullet point there, Michael, people begin making
Right.
decisions.
Before they get their first job. Again, learning from their environment, their family. Maybe if you see your grandparents enjoying their retirement, that can give you a vision
Right,
of retirement before you even start your first job. And skills, personal finance skills.
third point there, yeah.
Before going to college or before getting a job.
I think those 3 points are quite stressful within the deaf community because many of us don't have large sign language using families. We know that 90% of deaf folks are born to hearing parents that don't use sign language. So it's critical that we teach school support to be able to fill in those knowledge gaps.
Yes, indeed.
Now we've got 2 more facts that we would like to discuss, and I'll go ahead and handle those, Mike. First, teachers in schools can help reduce the problem by helping students become familiar with terminology, vocabulary, and practice skills. The practice one can become fluid at when they become ready to handle the real world. Our kids will be experts at dealing with these issues. In the United States, also, only 16.9% of high school students are required to take financial literacy courses before.
That's too low.
Isn't it? That is about 1 out of 5, which means that 80% of the people in our country don't have a basic understanding of financial needs or how to save or what they can do to prepare and plan for their future retirement, which is a serious issue. Again, that number, 16.9%, applies to hearing folk in general. I'm sure the numbers for our deaf community would be a little smaller.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, we have a poll question to ask because, of course, we're very curious who is here in the audience with us tonight. Are you a parent? Are you a social worker? Are you a deaf youth yourself? Are you a teacher? If you'd like to, go ahead and answer our poll question on the box that's going to populate on your screen as we speak. Mike, I'm curious. What do you think the makeup of our audience is going to be tonight? You think it'll be mostly parents, deaf students, deaf youth, social workers?
I'm guessing teachers.
I have about the same feeling. I see 12 attendees tonight. Pretty sure some are parents, some are teachers, but I'm really curious to get the numbers back. So let's see if the poll has been responded to by everyone. Ah, yes, it has.
Teachers.
Amazing. Yeah, we were right. That means teachers win with 63%. 63% of our audience tonight are educators. 25% of those with us tonight are parents, and we have 1 actual deaf youth. I would like to take the time to welcome you all. Thank you. We'll go ahead and start with our first discussion question for the night. We typically have 5 to 6 different discussion questions during the webinar, and I take turns with our guest panelists having a discussion about it. And when we're done having our discussion, we open the room up to the audience via the Q&A feature. You'll see there's a Q&A chat box because we do also want to hear from you and know what your questions are. So Mike, let's talk about what retirement-related topics are an important part of financial literacy curriculum. I think that's an important question for myself because I work with several high school students who I want to see graduate and I want to see them have their independence. So Mike, you know students who leave after school. You've left after I did. And what is your experience like? What types of issues do you think we need to be addressing now?
Really, there's so many topics that need to be taught, but first, you need to think about the philosophy of education that's out there. There's 3 points to it. When you get money, you need to focus on the 3 S's. Spend, save, and share are the 3 S's of what to do with your money. And that's where retirement comes in. That's that saving part. So you really want to encourage everyone to start saving for retirement.
I think that's quite critical for high school students, or even if they're at a deaf school. Typically, they're on their own and looking to spend their money when they're not with their family and at a deaf school. And we want to see our deaf kids make wise decisions with their money and their purchases amongst their friends or wherever they might be. You mentioned the key word there, savings.
Right.
So do you recommend teaching our deaf youth about banks and savings?
That too. And with the topic of savings, you can teach about investments, Social Security, pensions, all of those topics are important to learn about because those will lead to a comfortable retirement. But it's all about savings, setting up goals, and making sure that 10% of every check that you receive, you put away and you store away for emergencies. It's good to establish an emergency fund also for your long-term goals like retirement.
I see. And related specifically to retirement, I'm curious how you would even begin teaching about retirement to a high schooler. I have a story I'd like to share. I was hired right out of high school. I was working at a social work agency that had a retirement plan, and they had all sorts of funds. And to be honest, I was just ignorant of all that situation, and I didn't bother investing my money back then. And now that I look back, I really regret it. I wish I had done something with that knowledge.
You're right. Typically what's discussed on the first day of employment, on that first day is when you choose to opt in or opt out.
You are so right.
And everyone should opt in. Unless you specifically know you don't want that plan, then you should opt out. But that is a choice that you should make on the first day of employment. Everyone should opt in, for sure.
And we're talking about high school age kids, even younger kids. They're looking at the now. They're not thinking about the long term at the end phase of their life. They're thinking about now, and they're thinking $50 a month? Put that away?
Right. They're just thinking about next week or maybe next year, but not 40 years down the road.
Sometimes they're thinking about tomorrow only. Some of the high schoolers I've seen. What are some strategies that we can use, Mike, to teach them how important it is to actually save and hold on to that money for later?
Well, you can use an app that will show the results of your saving. So as you store that 10% away every week or every month, you can see the results of that 20 or 30 years down the line. That's really a good visual way to show you how your savings work.
I think the visual aspect of teaching financial literacy is probably critical for deaf youth.
Definitely, for deaf ed.
Well, Mike, we've talked quite a bit. Why don't we look at what our attendees have to say? Now, we do have a Q&A box for the audience. We'll go ahead and put some eyes on it and see what the chatter is coming out of that. Oh, there is a question saying, how would you explain the difference between a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA to a high school student? Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, there are two different kinds of IRAs. I'm actually more familiar with pensions personally.
Uh-huh.
It's a tax deferred, whereas I believe Roth is pre-tax. So taxes are deducted from your paycheck and then that money is put into the account. Honestly, I'm not very knowledgeable between the two and the difference between the two, but I do know that if you withdraw your money early, you'll have heavy penalties. If you withdraw money from a Roth IRA before the age of 72, I believe.
Okay, okay. So really, it's about making a decision if you want the money to be there when you start your retirement, or if you want to be a little more flexible and be able to pull that money out and withdraw it when you need it. So I see the difference there. I'm
Right.
curious if you know any students there at RIT that are having thoughts or plans on deciding between an IRA and a Roth.
Well, most of my students are freshmen, and really they're not thinking beyond, say, next month, like we discussed earlier. But I do encourage them to take advantage of investing in a Roth IRA. You know, go ahead and get a part-time job, I'll tell them, whether that be on campus, you know, in the cafeteria or at the library. But go ahead and start working and invest in your future retirement plan. Even if it's just little bits at a time, it will all pay off later.
Right. We really have to start thinking about ways that these students can start making money so they can start saving money, right? Okay, let's take a look at our next Q&A question, Mike. Next question is, what do kids need to do to begin planning for retirement? I am familiar with the person who started in elementary school, and that person kept saving money, never spent that money. And by the time this individual graduated high school, they had over $350,000 saved by babysitting and saving that money. That person later on became an attorney, which is quite impressive. So obviously, that is a dream that someone made happen for themselves. Mike, what would be your top 5 suggestions for kids to begin doing now, and what should they think about for their future and plan their retirement?
Well, first off, they should take a personal finance course. I would recommend that at the junior high and high school level, really. It's very clear that we need to impact more than the 16% of students that are being reached right now.
Very clear.
They should make that course a part of the required courses for graduation, I believe. And then I would recommend that they ask questions to their family members. Their family may have a CPA, certified, or CFA, certified financial planner, or somebody that they're familiar with, and they can ask advice from these professionals. It doesn't cost any money to ask questions. So I encourage questions.
Uh-huh.
Also, I encourage parents to open up a college fund, a 529 college savings plan. And the earlier, the better. So I ask my students to ask their parents about that type of savings plan.
That seems that that would be helpful, to talk to your parents about help with retiring.
Yes, it's so important for parents to also share information about their own uh, financial accounts and show how accounts grow and how investments work and having savings plans.
Right, Mike. And I do have a question relating to that. Some kids don't have a traditional family in the sense that they just don't. And other kids face communication barriers in their families. So I'm curious, if deaf kids don't have family members to be able to support them, are there any organizations out there that can provide that support?
The best resource would be their teacher. They should ask their teacher to help them identify maybe the needs for a student who needs that type of support. I would say the teacher is the best resource for that.
Right. Does your department work with any deaf schools, provide any type of support like that?
Yes, you're correct. We do. In our department, I work with the Utah School for the Deaf and Blind. We help them develop their personal finance course, which has now become an online course. And one goal of the curriculum that's offered is that once a student takes a personal finance course, they can take a test, a literacy test, and they don't have to pass this test in order to pass the course. But if they do pass this test, then that becomes a part of their grade, and it shows a demonstration of their knowledge in personal finance. And they can use that towards their goal after graduation. They can use that beyond graduation for whatever their goals are.
Mike, I'm curious, that testing you offer, is that nationally available or who provides that?
I actually have that particular certification. I took it 2 years ago, and the program is called WISE, W-I-S-E. I don't know what the acronym stands for. I'd have to get back to you with the full name.
Okay, that's okay.
But there's about 30 multiple choice questions that touches on all areas of personal finance. And a study guide is given to everyone who's taking the test, and you can retake the test 2 times. You have 3 opportunities in total to pass the test. And some students are passing even at the high school level. And once they pass that, maybe they will consider pursuing a business degree or work within the business sector.
Okay, Mike, last question from me before I turn it over back to the audience for their questions. I'm curious because I know you work with accountants and all that. What type of, or in accounting, what type of mathematical foundation do you need for that?
Very basic algebra, just knowing basic arithmetic is enough for you to do well at learning personal finance. Yes, there is some advanced concepts like interest and future value, present value, but basically having a basic knowledge of, algebra, you'll do fine.
I'm impressed with that, Mike, because I am familiar with a lot of people that don't want to bother with algebra, but you just mentioned having knowledge on it is really good. So I love that. I love you mentioning that. I appreciate your help in that department. Now I want to turn it over to the audience members and see if there's any questions that they have on what their kids should do before planning for retirement. I see we've got 2 questions already. The first one from Rose. Thank you, Rose. She's asking for the 3 S's that you mentioned, Mike, and the share. A lot of the students do want to help others in big ways, but their own families are also needy and don't have the type of money to be able to share. So how would we encourage them to give back in other ways? Just curious what your thoughts might be, Mike.
Right. I did mention the three S's, and the third one is share. However, you can share other things other than money. It could be your time or your knowledge. Doesn't necessarily always have to be money. You could volunteer in an organization to satisfy that. You know, sharing your skills with any particular organization. Time and skills equals money, really.
It really does, Mike. That's why I love working where I do at the Lauren Clare Center. We have a big community need there, and so we have community members also putting in 40 hours of community service before their graduation.
Right. Same thing with New York.
Yeah, now we do have to move along. I see Brita Schwal has a question saying, I'd love to get certified. Can you share that WISE certification information?
Sure thing. I can do that afterward.
Okay, I think there's another question. Now, with those courses you help develop with USDB, what curriculum does that include?
Well, they were already teaching it. I was just helping them transition their courses into online courses. So I just found out, what they were teaching in their current curriculum. It wasn't about creating a brand new curriculum. It was just creating an online curriculum.
I see. Okay.
Just to clarify.
Is that like through video cam, or what type of format does that course take?
Yeah, it was some type of CMS,
A CMS,
management system.
yeah, course management system. Yeah, it seems like people want to know more and more about online courses for
Yeah,
instruction. And you can rewatch them when they're online too, because they're recorded.
that's true. Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next question. But right before we do our discussion question, we'll ask a poll question. This is poll question number 2. We'd like to ask our audience, what age do you think it's appropriate to begin discussing retirement concepts with deaf youth? 5, 10, 15, 20 years old? Question box should populate on your screen. And you can answer there. And Mike, while we're here and everyone's answering, can we talk about those age brackets? What you think about that? Mike, can you see me?
Oh, yes.
Just curious what age range you like talking about.
Well, I vote for age 5.
5. That's really young.
Yeah,
Just curious.
but I feel like a 5-year-old could be exposed to their family using the ATM. They could have a piggy bank. That's typical for the age of 5. A 5-year-old could see how their family, spends money when they're out at the store. This, of course, I'm speaking as informal exposure. I'm not talking about a curriculum, of course. This is informal exposure. Yeah, sure. 5 years old.
Right, and it's also important to have that dialogue with our children or with deaf youth and explain to them why we're doing what we're doing. So I'm curious what the audience thinks is the right age to start teaching about retirement. So we'll open up the poll response there and look at those numbers. They're spread fairly evenly in one spot.
Yeah, they are.
Percent say 5-year-olds. Yay, good for you folks. Another 40% voted for teaching kids about retirement at age 10, which is also good. And we've got 2 at 15, and no one voted for teaching deaf youth about retirement at 20. So I think the consensus here is we need to start off younger than older. Thank you for participating in that discussion poll question. Now our discussion question number 3 is, what type of financial sources should students think about preparing for retirement? And that's a real interesting question. We had a webinar with Mark Apodaca a while back, 2 webinars before this one, where we talked about having various bank accounts in that webinar. One for current use, another for long-term savings, and another for midterm savings for money you might need to use. So we discussed having 3 different accounts. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on, Mike. How many accounts should a person have when they plan for retirement?
Well, this may not quite answer your question exactly.
That's okay.
I think of this in terms of, say, going to the library. You go to the library for information, right?
Okay, yeah.
And you can talk to your family's tax preparer to get some ideas on how to make a financial start.
That's cool.
Now, under the age of 18, there's really not much that someone can do in terms of opening an account. For example, my daughter, she's 16. Last summer, when she was 15, we went to the bank together and opened her a checking account. She had a job, and that job required direct deposit.
Okay.
So the two of us decided to open a checking account. Now, she already has a savings account, but we opened a checking account, and I went with her and realized it's actually a very complicated process. As a parent, I had to bring identification paperwork to prove that I am the parent or guardian of my daughter. She had to bring identity paperwork for herself as well. Anyway, it was an hour-long process getting this account set up. And she now has a debit card attached to her checking account.
Okay.
And that experience was a really wonderful way to expose her to these concepts at the very beginning.
It also seems that a lot of students need to learn about this process, right?
Yes, and it requires a lot of communication, a lot of back and forth. There were times that I let her take the lead and let her just speak directly with the bank representative. One question was she wanted an interest-bearing account. And there were various different accounts that she could choose from. And I was just there to help her open the account.
So I'm just curious, how did you help her open her account?
Well, if she didn't have a particular answer, I could help answer questions for her.
I see. So how did you discuss security and financial security online with your daughter? Because there's also a lot of scammers out there. They're trying to take people's money. So
You're right. Yeah, there is. Um, you know, she wanted a credit card, and I had to say no right away. I said, "You're not ready." So I said, "Hold off on that one. Just have a debit card for now." And she'll see the money as it comes out of her checking account. She can only spend what she has in her account. She didn't even know what a checkbook was.
uh-huh.
She thought that everything was handled through her debit card. And I had to explain to her that no, there are times that, uh, you may make payments or pay bills. Of course, she's not there yet paying bills, but I explained to her that I have a checkbook, which she was surprised about. Again, there's different generations that have different perspectives on
Please.
money.
Yeah, totally. And I realize we're running short on time. I have to apologize because we do have to move on into our next question. Our next discussion question,
This is my favorite question.
right? And this one kind of ties in to the others as well. But what kind of milestones should students be encouraged to set and envision and plan for? And so I'm curious your thoughts on this too, Mike.
Right. Well, first, I encourage them to get a job at whatever age they're at, but to really, I think that schools should afford the opportunity for students to work and to learn that, to learn what it's like to get a paycheck, um, and then that could even be done through a weekly or monthly allowance, earning a little bit of money every week, and then by doing some chores around the house, maybe that's another option. So you have spending, sharing, and saving again. Um, I allowed my daughter to spend $20, no questions asked, at the local mall, just to let her have that fun activity of learning actually how far $20 can go.
Well, I'm curious, Mike, then for college level youth. I know we're talking about your daughter's age level. And have you had any conversations with her about saving for college?
Yes, actually, in terms of working and savings, I've encouraged her to fill out her own tax form, because I started filling out my own tax forms at 16 and 17 and 18. Of course, I had my parents and family help me, but I was the one that actually filled out the form and signed on the line. And filling out that form helped me really think about retirement and keep that in mind. There's a lot of tax related issues connected to retirement, as you know.
There sure are. Yeah. And when I think about that, I realize how critical it is for me now, for anyone that is working age and has a gig in this e-economy like Uber or any e-jobs, and they're starting their own business and trying to be independent businesses working via Uber, and they don't realize that they've got to think and plan for tax season, for retirement, and so on and so on. And that's the difference between having a job or being an independent person, where you've got to handle those costs and you've got to make all those deductions to pay for those costs. So I think it's critical that we share that and people start thinking about that, especially our deaf youth. And I also wonder what our audience thinks about this. Let's open up the floor to them and see what questions we might have. I do see a good question there in the Q&A box. And we might be able to respond to this, Mike. What advice would we have to make retirement concepts more realistic, more concrete for youth, and not something to be feared or avoided? What are your thoughts, Mike?
People handle retirement differently. Some people want to travel. Others may want more time volunteering in their community. Maybe some want to go and visit family members. The goal is to be debt-free, though. And you shouldn't be afraid of retirement if you plan well in advance. Think about today's paycheck and how that will tie into your future retirement 20 years down the road,
Right. I think it's important for parents to take their kids through that process, or educators, teachers, whoever it is that is working with our deaf youth has to have this continuous and ongoing discussion about how we don't have to fear the future. And we can become role models for the deaf youth and talk to them about the decisions they have to make, and maybe sometimes about the mistakes we've made in our own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've responded to most of the Q&A questions. And so we'll move on to our next discussion point, which is discussion question 5, which is also a big issue in our community. Social Security. I've seen some high school students tell me, you know, I'm not going to work. I'll have Social Security. I'm not worried about it. And I've seen high school students who have struggled to try to get work and then give up on that and say, Social Security is there to take care of me. But it's not as simple as that, right? What do you think about Social Security income, Mike?
Yes, you're right. And not only Social Security and SSI, but you also have SSDI. And so those are three different types of benefits.
Yeah,
So in order to receive Social Security, you have to have worked 10 years to earn 40 credits in order to receive just the minimum Social Security amount.
I see.
So if you've never worked, you will not receive any Social Security. You have to pay into your Social Security fund.
Right, it's only
Or
Social
your,
Security income.
right, FICA. You have to pay into that in order to receive Social Security later. Right now, the full eligibility age to receive the full amount is 67. In the past, it was 65, but now they've raised it, and you have to wait until the age of 67 to receive it. Yes, you can get Social Security at the age of 62 if you wanted. However, it would be a lower amount. It would be 30% less than the full amount if you had waited until age 67.
I see.
And SSI is a completely separate topic.
I agree with you, Mike, but I think it's important to clarify this for our deaf youth because they make assumptions about what SSI is.
Right. You have Social Security, SSI, and SSDI.
Right. And I want to explain the difference with how much money you could get with that. Typically, do you get more money after working via Social Security, or do you get more money on SSI or SSDI? How do our deaf youth make wise decisions?
Well, Social Security is based on a person's income through their whole career. SSI assumes that a person has never worked and has been on a limited income and has limited resources. SSDI assumes that a person has already worked and earned enough credits to receive SSDI.
Okay.
A lot of people think that there's plenty of money that can be received on SSDI, but the average amount is really only about $1,200 a month. That is more than SSI. However, will $1,200 a month really sustain someone for their retirement? Probably not. So you have to rely on other investments, savings accounts or retirement accounts in addition to Social Security. Do not plan on Social Security being your sole and only source of income.
Understood completely, Mike. Good advice. Sadly, a lot of my students are under the assumption that Social Security, their SSI, is going to be there for them and their future. And I've had a student tell me that they didn't realize they're only going to get $400 or $500 out of their SSI, which is not enough to live on. So I'm curious about the audience members. Do any of you folks out there have any questions in regard to Social Security, the income, SSI? There's a lot of confusion between the SSDI and the SSI sometimes with students and what impact that may have on them.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Oh, Mike, I was just asking the audience if they have any thoughts on SSI, SSDI, and do they have challenges explaining the difference between each to their deaf youth and deaf students?
Well, teachers are responsible to explain the difference between Social Security, SSI, and SSDI to help students understand the difference between the three.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael. Let's move along to the next question here. And Mike, our next question just begs for more detail. So I can imagine that we do teach financial literacy in classes, right? Juniors and seniors mainly. And so when they're ready to head out to the big wide world, they sometimes are unaware of what's out there and what it'll be like. So what should we teach them? What sort of caveats should we give our deaf students? And what can they watch out for planning their future in retirement?
Well, I'm not sure if Social Security or Social Security income will even be available and be there for us 20 or 30 years down the line. So really, it's wise to plan as if that money will not even be there.
Uh-huh.
There's already talks about how FICA, how that fund is dwindling because the baby boomer generation is getting older and they're living longer. People are living longer, and so they're using these funds. So we don't know if that money will be there.
Yikes. So very critical to prepare for that money not being available someday. So what can a person do? Does everyone have to start their own investment account? Is that the only thing students can do at this moment?
Yes. Well, yes, I say everyone should go ahead and open up an investment account and start small if you need to. Just put a little bit away at a time. And finding the motivation to do that can be challenging when you don't understand why you need to save in the present. You really have to think about your future self and your future family's needs.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. An experience I'd like to share with my own family that I had. My grandmother passed about 2 years ago. And when she passed, she had a home. Now, we couldn't find any of the documentation on her ownership. So we weren't sure how to support that. Now, fortunately, she had insurance, but we also couldn't find the paperwork or documentation for the insurance. So I'm curious, what do you recommend to young people in regards to documentation? Should they develop a file keeping system? What do you think about that?
Yes, having paperwork, important paperwork filed away is important. For example, my daughter who opened her checking account,
Right.
with that, she received a folder with a lot of paperwork. And so she has that placed in a special spot in her room for safekeeping. Another pitfall is thinking about the impact of inflation.
Mm.
What is worth $10,000 today will not be worth $10,000 in 10 years. $10,000 will decrease in value
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
over time. So you also have to think about that as well.
We sure do. And we also have to remember that the cost of everything is going to go up over time as well. I remember when I was young, you could buy a house for $50,000. Nowadays, the cost has gone way up.
Same thing with cars. In the 60s and 70s, an expensive car was $8,000. Now, oh boy, cars are $30,000.
Yeah, they sure are. I am out of New York, and I remember when you can get a 4-story building for $8,000. Buildings nowadays are about $5 million for that. I mean, things are exorbitantly high priced now and skyrocketed. But everything, inflation affects everything, no matter what it is, food, housing. So we've got to keep that in mind, that future inflation and how it's going to impact our lives. We've got to keep that in mind and in our deaf youth's mind. I'll turn to the audience and see what thoughts you may have on this discussion question as well. Are there any pitfalls that you see for our deaf students that we should be making them aware of so they can prepare for their future and their future retirement? Seeing no questions in our Q&A box, we'll go ahead and wrap up tonight's webinar. Mike, I've really enjoyed having you here as a guest panelist tonight, and I've appreciated you sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. We're going to go ahead and mention your resource page. Here we need to add your WISE certification information here on the Teaching and Learning resource page. We have some apps listed that we typically use. Now, some had asked about curriculum, and we recommend Next Gen Personal Finance when it comes to curriculum, ngpf.org. There is curriculum available there. Our Lauren Clerk school students use that organization for that, and there's a variety of topics that can be gleaned from the ngpf.org website. Also, CSD Learns has received funding for developing online webinars that present financial tips on YouTube as well. And for the courses, they address issues like banking management and financial management. And those are all courses that are available online. They have short videos that talk about how to register for those investment classes. And so there's great videos for teaching our deaf youth on financial literacy. And I'm curious as far as apps, we do have two apps. One is Mint. Are you familiar with Mint, Mike?
Yes. Oh, not with my students, my college students, no. However, I have heard that that's a very highly recommended app.
It is. What's really nice about it, Mike, is you can connect to your bank accounts and it'll track your spending. And so it'll caution you when you spend too much, or even if you're spending too little. So it allows you to monitor what you're doing with your money. That's really cool, and it's really helpful for deaf youth. The second app we recommend people using is Acorns. Maybe you're familiar with that. I use it myself or have used it in the past. It's a nice app that allows you to make small investments. You don't need $100,000 or $1 million to invest. It allows you to start at even just $1. And they have their own funds. And so you can make decisions out of the funds that they offer and where to put your money. And it's a nice app. Those two apps are recommendable for deaf youth to use and start using now. And it's always important that they be taught about online safety as well, because the worst thing that could happen is for a deaf youth to go ahead and have their credit card numbers or banking information exposed and be vulnerable. We do have to watch out for online scammers nowadays, so we do have to caution them. And so it's important to get, sometimes they say, hey, let me pay you this money, give me your bank account number so I can get the money in your bank account, and then the kids get scammed out of their money like that. So we've got to caution them against that as well.
You're right.
Yep. Now we do have some up and coming webinars. We have one on credit and debt, challenges of deaf people and options for moving forward, and also starting a business. And that's with Harish, the interpreter missed the name there. Now we have another session in April, which will be discussing starting a business and entrepreneurship and in the deaf community. And we have two business leaders from the deaf community who will be our guest panelists. And one is Sean Maywald, who has just started a new business by the name of Refort, also a recent Gallaudet graduate, already on the way, starting their own business. And so we're looking forward to hearing from him. And our second guest panelist for that night is going to be a surprise. So please join us in the following months for our continuing series, Financial Literacy Webinars. And here's our final slide. I do want everyone to know that we have a survey that will be provided right after this webinar. We look forward to your thoughts and feedback. Please respond to our survey. We do benefit from your feedback. And so if you're interested in learning more or would like to access more content, reach to me directly. You can see my address is listed there on that PowerPoint. The PowerPoint itself will be shared with the audience at a later date. Some of the audience members also asked if this video recording will be available online. And typically it takes about a month for us to make our videos accessible for everyone. So keep your eyes peeled and keep looking forward to the date when you can share this information with your deaf students. Thank you all, members of the audience that are here with us tonight, and I wave goodbye.
Have a